Hey everybody, Hoosier Jedi here with another review for you. This time I'm talking episode 16 of season 4 of The Walking Dead, called A. If there's some significance to this title, it's lost on me. I mean, the last one around us, that sort of made sense. I don't really think there's any particular significance to if you put the titles of these two episodes together that they actually spell out USA. I think that's probably just a coincidence. But yeah, if there's some deeper meaning to the letter A in this situation, it's lost on me. I'm sure somebody will probably point it out to me. In retrospect, it will be very obvious. But anyway, so I've seen a lot of people online complaining that this was somewhat boring season finale, and well, it is a somewhat slow-paced season finale. It's not really that big action-packed sort of thing that we got at the mid-season finale. But it's not really necessarily bad. They decided not to try and repeat themselves. It is an interesting and understandable storytelling choice. It's to say our mid-season finale was very action-packed. Maybe we should go for something a little bit quieter, a little bit more character-driven. So I thought it was all right, but I have to say there definitely have been better cliffhangers on Walking Dead, and yeah, they maybe could have used at least a little bit more zing. Other than that, the main complaint I've seen people making is, well, there's no hint as to what happened to Beth, and we haven't seen Tyrese and Carol. Well, we know where Tyrese and Carol are. They are on their way to Terminus. We don't know exactly how far behind everybody else they are, but they did decide to hang around that cottage for a little while, so they're probably only a day or two behind. And it's not like we aren't going to see them when the show comes back in October, probably pretty quickly. I'm sure they'll be most instrumental in saving the day. Now, as for Beth, well, there's quite a few bit of speculation floating around out there as to what happened to Beth, but I'm not really sure how much of it I want to indulge in without potentially spoiling what may or may not be going on at Terminus, and of course, who the hunters are from the comics. But it would seem that the folks at Terminus are not at least 100% straight riff on the hunters. In fact, actually, given that creepy room that Rick and the gang stumbled across, it seems like in a way that they're almost like a cult. Now, of course, I'm not saying that they're like the saviors. The saviors and are not involved in this situation, and it's going to be quite a while before we would see them, I would imagine. Simply because the way their leader is so similar to the governor. So what I really think here we're doing with the people at Terminus now is sort of reworking them as kind of a dark reflection of the way people were at the prison. Now, of course, Woodbury was also meant to be that, but here it's taken on a more... Well, let's put it this way. In Woodbury, the governor was evil, and some of the people that worked directly under him were not good guys, but the majority of the people at Woodbury were good people. Here at Terminus, it looks like everybody's a bad guy. Yeah, like I've seen some people have compared them to apparently seeming to be some sort of a cult, perhaps. Well, of course, we don't really get to see enough of them to really make any judgments, but that would be an interesting riff, to see them as a counterpoint to Rick and what he and his group had built at the prison. But yeah, it's very obvious that the Terminus guys are up to some very bad stuff. Of course, they've got everybody locked up in the train car. They stole all their stuff. And if you're paying attention while Rick and the gang are getting chased around the complex, there's apparently a big pile of bloody skeletons laying around. Yikes, huh? Another thing I found disappointing about this episode is that Gareth, who is a character who was really hyped by the folks behind the show, he's only in this show literally for like 20 minutes. When he first appeared, I literally glanced over at the clock on my wall to see how far into the show we were, and it was 40 minutes in. So for a character like that to get really as much hype as he did, it really doesn't feel like that was worthwhile payoff. But anyway, so let's just sort of look at what's going on in this episode. And one thing that I did like is the framing device for this episode. And of course, this is being the season finale, we have to get a big fat dose of everything goes to hell. But this is framed around all those scenes set back at the prison to show better times. And to really underline just how much everybody has lost this season. And it also serves to underline the growth that Rick has had as a character this season. We see Rick, basically he's going out there and is like, I don't want to be Rick, the leader of the band of scared survivors. I just want to stay here and be Rick, the farmer. Well, here we see that Rick going out there and being insanely ruthless and pragmatic. It really highlights that Rick was kind of kidding himself back at the prison. There was no, you can't just sort of drop the mic on the zombie apocalypse and say, I'm going to go off and be a farmer. It doesn't work that way. And here we see Rick, maybe not, Rick comes to I guess you could say comes to a certain degree of acceptance of this. I think that's sort of a little bit of what that freak out after stabbing the guy to death was after. Of course, it was also that he did this in front of his son, and no sensible person wants to stab someone to death in front of their kid. But I did like that scene at the very end where Rick says they have no idea who they're messing with, and this is a scene very much out of a scene out of the comics, except they were able to use a little bit harsher language than that. So yeah, and of course, when Rick kills Joe, that just by literally tearing his throat out, that's also straight out of the comics. Very, very brutal stuff there, and also that guy who got eaten by the zombies, like seeing his face get torn up like that's got to be, I think, one of the most graphic things that waves they've shown a person to die on this show. That was just. And it also, that guy dying also really served, again, to highlight that you can't underestimate the walkers. You cannot ever think that you are totally safe from the walkers. And it also emphasizes that if you're trying to go it alone out there, you're dead. That's just not going to happen. You're not going to make it. Now you can kind of point at somebody like Michonne and say, well, she was making it. And it's like, well, yes. Michonne was surviving, but she wasn't living. Even in her own words, Michonne said in that time that she was a monster. And then she says that it was people like Andrea and Carl and Rick who really brought her back. And really think about how Michonne was back when we first saw her. She was very much, in a way, a person who had basically almost referred to a feral state. Now, keep in mind, I'm saying the word almost there. Of course, she could still speak and rationalize, and wasn't, beating her chest and doing Tarzan yells or anything like that. But she had the mindset of a predator, not the mindset of a person. And coming back to that, really being a person again, being somebody who smiles and laughs and jokes and has friendships and relationships. That's really what Michonne's journey since we met her has been about up until this point. And that scene with her and Carl, where Carl is talking about, how, after having killed that one guy, he was worried about turning into a monster. We see that scene at the prison where Rick sees Patrick screwing around with some Legos while Carl is off cleaning a gun. And it's not lost on Carl that Rick wants Carl to be a more innocent soul like Patrick was. But that's just not on the table for Carl. We don't really know enough about Patrick to really say, but I think it's a fairly good guess that Carl's went through even worse stuff than whatever Patrick went through before he ended up at the prison. So, yeah, there is that. But but also looking at it, Carl has grown, I think, quite well as a character. I mean, look at the way he was in season 2, when people were just, everything was basically either die Carl or die Lori. Now, of course, there are still folks out there who are not fans of Carl, and there probably always will be. But I have to say, he's become a much richer and more interesting character, especially now that he's hitting his teens. But again, this is also due more to the fact that, the show is heading into its 5th season, while I think only about 2 years have really passed, timeline-wise, in universe. But, hey, it's television, right? So let's see. Another thing, speaking of Michonne, is I like how she says when they're talking out by the road, do you think Terminus is legit? And I like the fact that at least somebody really put it out there that's like, hey, how do we not know that this isn't all just a big trap? Glenn and everybody else kind of walked into it all because they just sort of took what was happening at face value. Let me see here. Just looking at my notes here. Oh yeah, some nice stuff from Daryl. Again, we really do see that Daryl, while he might be a guy who's rough around the edges, and on the surface appears very similar to Joe and the Marauders, and of course to his brother, underneath it all, Daryl really is not like that. Daryl is a kind and compassionate person underneath it all. Now, the life he'd led until everything went to hell really didn't allow for that to function much, didn't allow it to come to the surface. But now, in this world, free from Merle's influence, Daryl is really able to let that shine. And you can really see it, where he basically steps in there to try and sacrifice himself to save the others, in just the horrible, horrible guilt he feels in having lost Beth. And then he gets that great moment with Rick, where Rick says, "You're my brother." And if you really stop and think about it, given his nature, Rick really is the brother that Daryl should have had. I mean, imagine if Daryl and Rick had each other, in the past. If Daryl had really had someone like Rick as a brother instead of someone like Merle, how different a person he would be. And you also have to look at Rick. I mean, Rick was also someone who was seriously let down by a man who basically he considered his brother, Shane. And, well, we all saw how that happened, how that ended. So seeing these two guys really connect like that, it's very strong and powerful stuff. I really did like that. And, let me see. Yeah, I really think that kind of covers everything that I have to say about this episode. So, I have a feeling that it's going to be very interesting to see how things get turned around. And whatever happens with Beth, I really don't think that they're going to kill her off screen. That's not something that fans ever react to well. So, also, the group still does sort of need that voice of morality, and Beth is somebody who fills that role really well, especially now that Herschel is gone. But we'll see. And yeah, that covers everything I had for you this time, guys. As always, you can follow me on Twitter at Hoosier Jedi. And until next time, take care and have a good one.